Good morning, everyone. So, this video we are going to discuss the organization of the banking business, or in simple words, we can say that we are going to discuss the types of banks, right? So, there are various types of banks in India. If we talk about generally uh, this categorization, the organization structure, or various terminologies like the organization structure of banking industry in India, the various classification of banks, the various types of banks that we have seen, they are basically depends, and there are various types of banks in India that attempt to meet the financial requirement of different customers, whether they are the retail customers, or they are the corporate houses, or they are the corporate clients, or whether they are the governments or the individual clients. So based on the clientage, based on the customer's profile, based on the demographics, there are many factors which helps in order to diversify the banking structure, and to have more widespread organization structure or classification or categorization in types or varieties of banks that are available in the Indian banking industry, which caters to the different kind of needs of the customers. So these categories, these classification can be differentiated on the basis of various industries, various demographic characteristics of the people, the occupation or the professions of the people, and lot many other factors. So if we generally see and want to classify or summarize the entire banking industry in India, how it graphically looks like, what are the various hierarchies, what are the various tiers, which means what are the various steps, sub parts, sub banking structures. So these in India, to be very specific from Indian context or Indian point of view, is that we have majorly scheduled and unscheduled banks, and we're going to see and we're going to have it in the picture. So this is how the Indian banking system at glance, or this is how the entire banking industry in India or banking structure in country like India is based upon. So how we are going to proceed as far as this particular concept is concerned, that this is what is most probable that we are going to discuss in our subsequent video, in our next video, right? So one by one we'll be taking up that. The very first part on the top, we have the central bank, that is RBI in bracket, which means the Reserve Bank of India. So it is the central banking institution, also known as the apex body, which regulates the entire banking mechanism, entire banking industry in India. It regulates the working of the banking system, right? Followed by the central bank or RBI. One is known as the scheduled banks, and another is your unscheduled banks, right? So if we talk about scheduled banks, these are those banks which are listed in the schedule second of the RBI Act, right? Whereas unscheduled banks are those banks which are not listed, just opposite to what scheduled banks are there. But not only by saying this particular line that banks which are involved, banks which are included in the scheduled banks can be known as the scheduled banks, and which are not included in the schedule, these are known as unscheduled banks. So there are few parameters, there are few factors why and how any banking concern, any banking entity, any bank, or in order to constitute a bank, any company, any banking institution, how to enter into that particular schedule. So there are few norms of RBI, there are few rules of RBI that that particular company, that particular bank has to maintain. Unscheduled banks are also known as LAB, local area banks. Scheduled banks comprises of two major aspects, two major categories. One is your commercial bank, another is your cooperative banks. So these are the basic structure that majority of the books are having. But as this video will be going on, as this concept will be going on, so we will be taking care of 4 to 5 different diagrams in which we'll be taking care of the perspective of the different authors, the views of the different authors, where types these organization structure of commercial banking and the entire banking industry has been viewed upon by different angles. So this, as far as our syllabus is concerned, this as far as we are going to discuss in detail. So this is one of the most probable diagram which includes and which we are discussing right now, right? So commercial bank and cooperative banks forms the two important aspects, two important ingredients of the scheduled banks, right? So commercial banks, as the name suggests, based on the profitability motive, their main objectives are to earn profit and to deal with the clientage, to deal with the motive of commercial, that is profitability motive, right? So again, these commercial banks are divided into four categories. One is known as the public sector bank, another is your private sector banks, third is your foreign banks, and fourth one is your RRBs, regional rural banks, right? So this is the next tier of commercial banks or next subcategory of the commercial bank. On the other hand, we have the cooperative banks. So cooperative banks again are divided into two categories: urban cooperative banks or state cooperative banks. Now comes to the understanding of this particular hierarchy. So commercial banks, four sectors, four types of bank: public sector, private sector, foreign banks, and regional rural banks. Again, if we complete this diagram by its own, then public sector banks are also again divided into two major categories. The first part is other nationalized banks, and second is SBI and associate banks. Though we know that these days, after 1st April 2017, associate banks does not exist in the Indian banking structure, so they are being merged into SBI after 1st April. On 1st April 2017, they have been merged into SBI. So the concept is SBI has been taken into different category, forming the part and parcel of public sector banks. Public sector generally means the government sector banks, right? And other than SBI, all other government sector banks which have been formed because of the or due to the nationalization process, right? All other banks except SBI, which are coming under the government banks or public sector banks, forming the part and parcel of other nationalized banks. So right now we are not coming the meaning of the public sector banks, private sector banks, foreign banks, regional rural banks, urban cooperatives banks, state cooperative banks, and how commercial banks are different from cooperative banks. We'll discuss it in the next video, right? But this is what is Indian banking system at glance. But when you go for different books, when you will refer the literature that is available on the internet, right? When you refer the literature that is available in different books, in majority of the books, you will come across many other banks, many other views of the authors that may bring a kind of confusion, and that may bring a kind of different views that this was not included in that. So in order to resolve that confusion, in order to resolve that biasness or doubts and queries, I'm going to show different 3 to 4 again different diagrams, different organization structure, different these kind of images, in which you can find out that different authors have different views, and they, as per their own views, as per the literature that is available in the books, in different books and in different sources on the internet. So these are different. How these are different, that we are going to discuss in this particular video, right? In order to have the complete understanding about how this entire structure is there as far as Indian banking industry is concerned. So this is talking about that we have RBI on the top, divided into scheduled and unscheduled banks. Scheduled banks again divided into two categories. That first one is the commercial bank, another is the cooperative banks, right? So cooperative banks again divided into another categories, and after that commercial banks again divided into four categories. So public sector banks, private, and public sector banks again divided into two categories, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to see the another diagrams. This is another diagram which talks about that we are not including RBI, and we are talking about the Indian banks are divided into scheduled banks and non-scheduled banks. Similarly, scheduled banks have commercial banks and cooperative banks. Cooperative banks, again, rural and urban cooperatives, wonderful, the same which have been depicted in the previous diagram. But if we just see this commercial banking here, because this is what we are interested to learn, this is what we are interested to understand in a deeper way, right? This is as far as our syllabus is concerned, and because as an individual, as a retail customer, we are taking our transaction, we are doing our majority of the transaction with the commercial banks. So in the previous diagram, we were having 4 parts as far as commercial banks are concerned. Now in this particular diagram, few of the authors suggest, few of the books have this particular diagram, and various sources on the internet have this particular structure, in which there are 5 categories. In 5 categories means that they do not consider government banks or public sector banks. So what they have come up, they have come up with State Bank of India and its associates as the first category, and other nationalized banks as the second category, and rest are same: regional rural banks, RRBs, foreign banks, and then we have private banks, right? So public sector banks has been split into 2 aspects, 2 parts, that is SBI and its associate, or right now they are being termed as SBI, State Bank of India, and as no associate or no subsidiary bank is existing right now. Then the second part is nationalized banks other than the SBI, which these first two categories, SBI and nationalized banks, were forming under the part and parcel of, or were included in the government bank or public sector banks. So this is the second view. Now another view, another image about that, we have RBI on the top, and another set is also introduced, which is talking about that commercial banks, we have public, private, regional, foreign banks. Similarly, that is shown in the diagram, that we are having all these 4 banks, 4 banks: public, private, regional, and foreign banks, and again these nationalized and SBI and associates bank, right? Okay, then next part, cooperative, is again the another view: non-agricultural and agricultural, and then agriculture is again divided into long-term and short-term credit, right? This is one another aspect, that it is not based on the urban and rural. Now the different books, different sources have differentiated, and they have shown it in the another format on the basis of agricultural, right? Non-agricultural cooperative banks and cooperative banks which are based on the agriculture. So this way. Now the another set is also involved here, that is talking about the specialized banks. So you must have heard the names like EXIM, Export Import Bank, right? Industrial and agriculture, and these are those financial institutions, these are those specialized bank. Export and Import Bank, right? Industrial Credit and Investment Corporation, Industrial Finance Corporation, we have a Small Industrial Development Bank of India, we have NABARD, right? So these are just a few names that I am quoting here. These are also given and mentioned in various books, in different books. So how these banks are different? So these are not the commercial banks, but these are known as the development banks. So here in this particular picture, they are known by the term specialized banks. Specialized banks for export, import, international business. Specialized banks which are helping the customers, helping the clients as far as industries are concerned, and on the other part, agriculture is also concerned. Now we're going to understand it in more different way with the help of another image, with the help of another. So having the same thing, more of the things are of repetitive nature, but I just want to include the changes. What are the various changes that have been given in the books, that have been given and available on NAT and other sources, right? So what we are seeing here, that organization types of banking started from RBI, that is the central apex body which regulates the banking industry in India, that is RBI. Again, they are falling, earlier they were divided, they were having control over scheduled banks and non-scheduled banks, but in the previous diagram it was the specialized banks. Now it has been termed as development banks. See, the concept will remain same, but the approach is different, the views are different. So do not get confused. There should not be any kind of confusion that these are not included in Indian banking structure. So we have the scheduled banks again falling in commercial and cooperative banks and the same. So now here the cooperative banks are divided not on the urban and rural, not on the agricultural and non-agricultural basis, but they have been divided on the geographical basis. So we have state cooperative banks, central cooperative banks, and primary cooperative banks. But if we see non-scheduled banks, earlier there was no classification of non-scheduled banks, but right now we have coastal local area banks, we have capital local area banks, we have KBS local area banks, Subhadra local area banks. So these are few examples to quote under non-scheduled banks, right? Now come to the most important part, that is development banks, and these are the specialized institutions. So we have IFCI, NABARD, EXIM Bank, NHB, National Housing Bank, SIDBI, Small Industrial Development Bank of India, Mudra, that Mudra Yojana we are talking about for the entrepreneurial Mudra scheme and all these things. So these are basically referred as the development banks. Now come to the final version, and that I have compiled taking into consideration all these banking structures, right? All these banks, all these financial institutions. So we talk about in general. So this I find the most suitable in terms that we can understood it as that RBI comprises and RBI regulates both the parties, both the things. One is the banking concerns, other is your financial institutions, right? There are other financial institutions too that are RBI is also taking care. So these are like, on the bank side we have scheduled commercial bank and scheduled cooperative banks, right? Cooperative credit institutions, again the same hierarchy, public sector, private sector, foreign. And in this diagram we see cooperative banks include regional rural banks, urban cooperative, rural cooperative credit institution, and these. And other than these banking institution, we have the financial institution which works on like all India financial institution, state level institution which are working on the states at the state level, and other institution or other development banks, right? So this is all about the entire organization or types of banks which have been collected by referring to various sources that are available on the internet, and by referring various other books, right? So there should be no confusion at all. Different authors have their different views, different books are having different ingredients as far as the organization and types of banks are concerned. But what we are going to study in as far as our syllabus is concerned in detail, that was the first diagram, this one, right? So we are going to take care of this in detail in the next video. With these words, thank you everyone, and thank you.